Hello and welcome to rePRO Film Festival by mama.film. I am Debbie Samples.
I'm Leila Meadow-Connor.
And I'm Mallory Martin.
As the founders of rePRO, we want to thank the village of people who have made this festival possible, our filmmakers, special guests, partners, sponsors, and of course, our audience. You have lent your time, talents, and expertise to help amplify the voices that are so crucial in the fight for reproductive justice and bodily autonomy.
When you purchase tickets and donate to rePRO, you've become an active participant of change, as all net ticket sales and accompanying donations support our 5 beneficiary organizations.
We thank you for participating in these vitally important call to action conversations and hope you leave feeling empowered to be your own advocate in the world. Please keep women's reproductive rights at the forefront of your mind as we enter this critical election season. We're pleased to present the Legal Sterilization Call to Action conversation moderated by Zsanai Epps of Black Women's Health Imperative.
Hello, and welcome to rePRO Film Festival's Illegal Sterilization Call to Action conversation, a conversation to expose the history and present-day status of illegal sterilization in America. My name is Zsanai Epps, and I am the Special Projects Manager as well as the MSK Program Director at Black Women's Health Imperative, as well as the moderator for tonight's conversation. I am joined now by an incredible group of individuals. Erika Cohn, the director of the feature documentary, Belly of the Beast. Angela Tucker, the producer of Belly of the Beast, as well as Christen Marquez, the producer of Belly of the Beast. To those of you watching and listening in, feel free to ask questions along the way using the Q&A portal, and we'll do our best to answer as many as your questions as we can by the end of this conversation. So let's get started. I just want to start off by saying, wow, just wow. What a powerful film developed and produced by a group of amazing women. For many, this may have been their first introduction to what reproductive injustice looks like, within the prison system. I'd like to quickly just lay the foundation for reproductive justice. Reproductive justice is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. And what we've seen within this film is happening within prisons and within our communities, reproductive injustice. So Erika, Angela, and Christen, how did each of you come to this work?
Thank you so much for having us. I'll start. I was first introduced to attorney Cynthia Chandler, who you meet in the film, in 2010. We were introduced by a mutual friend, and I was really inspired by Cynthia's compassionate release work. You know, she had represented some of the first terminally ill people who were granted release from prison in California. And I was also really intrigued by Justice Now, which was at the time one of the only, if not the only, US organizations with board members currently in prison, kind of leading strategy and working collaboratively with those in the free world, really from the inside out instead of outside in. And I was very much taken by their Let Our Families Have a Future campaign, which exposed the multiple ways that prisons destroy the basic human right to family. One of the most heinous being the illegal sterilizations, which really screamed eugenics. It was happening predominantly to people of color inside prison. And Cynthia invited me into the organization as a volunteer, which I later became a volunteer legal advocate, providing direct service needs for over 150 people inside California's women's prisons. And from really there, I began working collaboratively with people inside on a project that became Belly of the Beast. And as you also have an opportunity to meet in the film, Kelly Dillon. And I had really heard about Kelly Dillon's powerful activism through my work at Justice Now, though I didn't really have a chance to meet her until a few years into the filmmaking process. And after Cynthia connected us, Kelly and I began working collaboratively on a variety of projects, including Belly of the Beast. And the more that I really learned about Kelly's experience as a survivor, her courage and selfless advocacy for others, I really felt that the film needed to center around her story. As we reveal in the film, Kelly's discoveries really catalyzed Justice Now to begin investigating the illegal sterilizations in prison, through which we meet other survivors.
Thank you. Angela or Christen?
Well, Christen, maybe you go next because it's like chronological. Yeah.
Yeah, chronologically, I came onto the project in about 2012, I want to say. And I was first introduced to this, world of illegal sterilization. And when I first heard about the issue, I was introduced to it through Erika and this project that she was working on. And I happened to be in North Carolina working on another project. And she just needed somebody to go and do some legwork on the ground in North Carolina as far as talking with other journalists who had been a part of a major push in North Carolina to work on reparations for women who had been illegally sterilized. And that was how I was first introduced to the work of Justice Now and the issue of sterilization for people inside. And they, I think when you first hear about this, when it is the first time you hear about this issue, it's incredibly shocking. And I think from that, I was just like, this is something I want to help and be a part of as much as possible. And that was my first introduction. And it's been quite a journey since then.
Yeah, and then I came onto the project, I guess it was a little over 3 years ago. And, but when I think about my exposure to this issue, I would say as a Black woman, I've heard about sterilizations occurring, but I don't think I really understood that it was sterilization exactly. You've heard these anecdotes about these kind of surgeries happening to women, like the tubal ligation happening to women, and having a sense that they didn't really give their consent for the tubal ligation to happen, but it was kind of like, well, this is just what you do. And so I've heard anecdotes. And it wasn't until working on this film that I really understood that what happened in the film is kind of part of a much larger issue. But what was happening in California was completely new to me until I met Erika. And, when I came on, there was, stuff to watch and to see. And, so I watched the footage, I saw Kelly, I knew it was an incredible story, and I wanted to really play a part in bringing her story specifically to the fore.
Thank you, ladies, for that. I think I can say this, and I think everyone else who watched the film, we really appreciate you for working together to produce this film that, opens up people's eyes around the world to things that is happening simultaneously as they're living their lives, but that's something that they're not really putting their focus on. So I appreciate you guys for bringing that to the forefront and really providing that story. So from 1909 to 1979, California law explicitly authorized state institutions to sterilize people who they deemed unfit to reproduce, and coercively sterilized over 20,000 people. 20,000 people. Throughout the 20th century, over 30 states had eugenic sterilization laws, and nearly 1/3 of all of those forced sterilizations in the US, they were performed in California. And until at least 2013, California was still sterilizing people in women's prisons. So, Angela, I read a quote from you, and it said that this is an open secret in communities of color. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think, it's partially what what I was talking about earlier is this notion of everyone has kind of heard an anecdote. And I can't speak specifically about California, though I'm sure it's the case there. But if you're a Black woman, you've heard an anecdote about another Black woman getting some kind of process, be it tubal ligation, be it a hysterectomy, that they didn't give their consent towards. And so that's why I called it an open secret, because when I heard that this was happening in prisons, it wasn't like my mind was like, I mean, I don't understand how, you know, when you said earlier the phrase deemed unfit to reproduce, we all know who that term, what kind of person that term is talking about, right? And if you're in that community, you've had conversations about your reproductive health that have been inappropriate, limiting, et cetera. So the idea that it goes as far as a forced sterilization is not really a shock to me, or I think to a lot of brown women.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, when we look at the data that's around just about what happens to Black women and other women of color when they access the healthcare system, how they're treated, the services that they receive, the services that they don't receive, the lack of health literacy and the lack of compassion from the providers to really provide that support as these women are seeking care through the system. So I think this is really huge in terms of what that means for other women outside of the prison walls and what it really means for them inside the prison walls, because it's a little bit different in terms of how they access those services and what they can and can't, you know, what they can refuse. But then it's also about, are these women, you know, how are they empowered? Are they educated about this? You know, what are their rights inside of the prison? So, you know, this open secret piece is just like, with everything else that happens in communities of color, it's like we know what's going on. It's still systems, it's the systemic racism, it's the things that we've dealt with all of our lives that impede our access and full autonomy to receive respect and the services that we deserve. So I want to pose this to all of you. Why was it imperative that your team use the power of storytelling and film to tell the story of Kelly and other women who experienced this?
Christen, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I think Kelly is just an amazing example and an advocate. And, you know, I think one major thing about this film is showing that there is a future, there's life beyond incarceration, and really highlighting, I mean, absolutely, this film is about a terrible thing that happened to Kelly. But even more so, it's about where she launches from. And I think that that's, you know, and that's the power of the storytelling of this film. And I think that's what has kept, you know, Erika going for all the time that she's been involved in this, and Angela. And, you know, this has been quite a push, quite an uphill push for a long time for this film. And it's incredibly exciting to see it coming out in a time where it can bolster Kelly in her future work and fit into a culture where maybe, hopefully now and continuing forward, it's going to be more receptive to this type of perspective on what's happening in vulnerable communities.
Yeah. And so how long did it take to really get Belly of the Beast produced?
It's been a 10-year in the making journey. And, you know, one of the most difficult parts of making this film is that there's a tremendous level of secrecy and privacy these institutions hide behind, it's incredibly difficult to uncover these abuses of power. And so, you know, as we're witnessing population control, modern day eugenics and systemic racism through policing, through imprisonment, through lack of access to healthcare, you know, that it was imperative for us as a filmmaking team to really ensure that we were uncovering the full depth and to be able to clearly relay both the filmmaking part of it, the kind of full character arcs, but also the reporting process. I mean, in the process of making this film, we calculated that between California State Audit and prison records, that nearly 1,400 sterilization procedures occurred between 1997 and 2013. And since 2014, California has been required to report the number of sterilizations performed each year and kind of prove medical necessity around each procedure. And our team also wanted to uncover, you know, to what degree this was happening in other states. You know, California is just one example. And so our team sent Freedom of Information Act requests to dozens of states across the country and discovered that only 6 states have banned sterilizations. 5 states allow for medically necessary sterilizations. 3 states still allow sterilization procedures, and all the other states either didn't respond to our request or declined to provide information, or stated that they had, you know, no policies that would have been relevant to our request. So in speaking with other organizations around the nation who work with people in women's prisons, we know that sterilization abuse is happening, but we don't know to what degree.
Yeah.
I think to follow up to something that Erika said, which is just a clarifying point that sometimes I make with people, which is you can get sterilizations. Like, people get sterilizations. They get, you know, hysterectomy, tubal ligation, those, you can provide consent to have those happen. But what we're talking about is this notion of forced sterilization, right? And so then it makes you ask this bigger question, which we talked about throughout the making of the film: can you gain consent in prison? And which we feel the answer is no, in these settings, right? So Kelly says something that's very profound to me that I think about all the time, which is it's not like she could go and Google something, get a second opinion. You know, when someone says to her, okay, this is what needs to happen, that's just what's going to happen. You know, it's there's no way to get any more information as to whether or not these are the things that should or should not happen. It's just kind of, this is what's going to happen to you, and you can stay in pain or not. You know, there's no middle ground. So so I just, sometimes I want to clarify that, because it's really hard for people to imagine what situation Kelly is in and people like Kelly are in. And that goes back to the story of the power of storytelling piece, which is trying to create a film that, to the best of our ability, can recreate what that experience is like.
Right. Yeah. And Erika, I think I saw a quote from you that said you wanted to reimagine how we view imprisonment. So can you talk about that? Like, what has been the response to this film? I believe you guys showed this at the Human Rights Watch. So what has been the response to that, and how do you think that you have succeeded your goal of having folks reimagine what imprisonment looks like in terms of sterilization and reproductive injustice that happens within those walls?
Prisons are just so far out of our minds and out of our consciousness. They're so far from our physical reach. We're rarely granted access to worlds behind walls that aren't dramatized or sensationalized. So when I say that I really wanted to imagine how we visualize imprisonment, I wanted to use imagery that really evoked memory, passage of time, really contrasting freedom and confinement, and very carefully wanting to viscerally place viewers within these intimate, vulnerable, uncomfortable spaces in prison. And our filmmaking team didn't have access to some of those spaces, and so therefore chose to carefully reconstruct some of those moments, which were really in collaboration with those whose stories we were telling. You know, we tried to reconstruct, agonizing over every little detail, feeling the weight of responsibility and gravity of accurately depicting that time, that place, that memory, that moment, each restricted space. And I feel in some of the conversations that have happened since our first Human Rights Watch Film Festival premiere that we've gotten a lot of feedback from people that said, either who were incarcerated, said, wow, this was so accurately depicted, or people saying, I never really viewed prison in that way, or I never really understood what it could look and feel like in that way. So.
Yeah, I think for me in the film, that part of the film where the doctor, the woman there in the exam room in prison, and the doctor is like eating, and, didn't wash his hands or have on the gloves, or, didn't change the little paper that's on the table. And it's just like, just seeing that, I'm just like, are you kidding me? No one in that place, no one stopped to say, like, this is not right. Because I know if I were to walk into a doctor's office and that be the case, there would be a problem. And I would advocate for myself. One, I probably would just leave. I would raise a little bit of hell because I do not want this kind of service. But I'm thinking about, as I watch the film, thinking about those women who are in there, and how could they even oppose that? How can they use their voice in a sense if that's all they're going to get, right? That's the type of care that they're going to get. And so, as you guys worked with Kelly and other women who have shared their stories, what were some of the thoughts from those women for that scene? Like, what was their reaction for those who may have experienced it or who may have not? Because I know that angered me.
I think that some of the reactions from people who have been placed in similar situations is that it can be very, very triggering, very raw, very real, because the way that we shot everything was so much in collaboration with people who had experienced this directly. And the shots that you're talking about, even there's a series of shots where people are sitting on the exam room table waiting for a pap smear, and all you see is legs dangling from the table. And that's a moment that a lot of us can identify with, and placed within a coercive environment where your mere existence is dictated by force. You are under constant threat of force. And I think that it really helps set the stage to what kind, as Angela mentioned earlier, that, that notion of consent, how can it be possible within these coercive environments? And also, very universal experiences that all of us have had in seeking healthcare to some degree.
Yeah, I know there were plenty of moments within the film where I know a lot of us thought to ourselves, like, wow, I can't imagine if that had happened to me as I'm, accessing healthcare and interacting with a physician or interacting with a nurse who is supposed to, and these are healthcare officials who take an oath to do no harm. And they're doing harm in these spaces by not respecting the women who are receiving those services, not respecting their right to give consent, not coerce consent, but consent to these services. And the right to know, I think in one part of the film, she couldn't even access her records. And that's a problem when you think of folks trying to take control of their health and empower themselves by having all of their information and just not being able to access that. So have you guys heard about other women who have had that trouble of not being able to access their health information, or it being inaccurate when they do access it?
Yeah, from my work as a legal advocate, as a volunteer legal advocate, there were dozens of times that I was requesting medical records on someone's behalf where information came back like totally blank, and it took like there was just pages and pages of blank papers, and it maybe took 10 different requests to actually get the accurate information. And there's a tremendous barrier to accessing medical records in prison because of cost too. And so one, if you're not given access to your medical records because of cost, you actually have to pay per copy. Each paper you're paying for, in addition to getting a total runaround where you're not able to actually get your medical records in hand because you're sent blank pages or you're told to go to someone else, that even as a legal organization advocating for someone having trouble, I mean, that says a lot to the barriers that one has, and being able to have information and be able to make informed decisions about some of the most intimate parts of one's lives, one's medical history, one's future.
And I feel like, within the prison system, I mean, it's within the prison systems, but it's really within the world at large. All of this kind of fake bureaucracy is created to keep people from being able to access their rights, right? So it's like everything in prison, you have to pay for every single teeny little thing. And there's a form for everything. And the goal for that is for you to just kind of like not lose interest, kind of run out of steam around doing anything, like it's like just you have complete control because I don't want to deal with, or I'm not able to, I don't have anyone to advocate for me for all of the various forms that I need to get basic care. So because a lot of the women inside didn't have anyone to help them with it. Like Cynthia was an incredible advocate and was able to tell all of these women, like show people their records, and different people like Erika and other people like that were able to go in and show people their records. But a lot of people don't have advocates like that, and so they just sort of are like, well, like whatever you say, and that's all kind of part of control.
Yeah. Wow. And that kind of leads me to the status of Kelly and Cynthia's reparations bill, because there are women who to this day still don't know that they were sterilized. Mm-hmm. So if you guys can talk about that a little bit, just, what has that process been like? And, how can individuals and organizations and other communities support this petition for reparations?
Do you want to start, Angela?
Oh, okay, I can start. You can chime in. Sorry, that's where I'll like you talk. Yeah. That's why there are all these pauses. We are working with California Latinas for Reproductive Justice and CCWP. And Kelly has been very involved with this, and Cynthia has been very involved in a reparations bill in California. And it's a petition that I think we can share with folks, so we can figure out how to share that with people at large to sign. And that would be to provide reparations for women who were forcibly sterilized in California. So that bill, that petition is still going around, and we're still waiting for the moment when that's going to be discussed and considered. So we're just kind of gathering more and more people to get behind that. Erika, any other updates you think about that?
I know that the California legislature will be voting on whether to include the $7.5 million budget request later this month. And that $7.5 million goes to, as Angela mentioned, to compensate people who were illegally sterilized between 1909 and 1979, as well as those sterilized in prison up until 2013. It also goes to notify those who were sterilized who may not know to this day, as you mentioned, in addition to creating some sort of memorial acknowledging California's eugenics past and making amends.
And then one thing that I had wanted to mention, just outside of what's happening with Kelly and her, in terms of call to action, that may be like more local as well outside of California. It's not exactly, it's not explicitly stated in the film, but mass incarceration and keeping communities of color apart physically, and incarcerating women and people, transgender, non-binary, and men apart from each other is like a de facto type of limitation on reproductive rights and reproductive justice. It's like just preventing women and people from having children during their reproductive years and being able to support their families. So, I think anything looking into dismantling, defunding, abolishing prison systems, and that's, I think, again, something that's more and more work that people are aware of. So, continuing to support those movements that are working towards dismantling those systems is a way to support this work.
Yes, thank you, Christen, for that. Because I was just gonna kind of weigh in and, to ask like the importance of rehabilitation versus mass incarceration. We hear stories about women who may become imprisoned and, they're pregnant and, they may be forced to have a C-section. Or they can't, go into a program so that, they're not forced into a C-section, that they can have a natural birth, or some other options for women who are pregnant, who come in contact with the criminal justice system. Because I think, more rehabilitation versus mass incarceration would support communities to, one, stay together, and not have to go through these things and be filtered through a system that when they become a part of the system, when they become a number, that their health and wellness is not neglected just because their life happened to come across with the criminal justice system. So thank you for that, Christen, for speaking to that. I think we had a question that came in and someone said, what could reparations really look like? So I want to pose that back to Erika, Angela, and Christen and the team. What could reparations look like?
I mean, I could take that a little bit as far as like what has happened in North Carolina, and then Erika, you probably know a little bit more about what Kelly and Cynthia and the coalition is talking about doing here in California. But there has been a template as far as this, not necessarily for women and people incarcerated, but in North Carolina, there was a reparations bill that was passed, and people have actually received reparations for sterilizations that were done forcibly upon them. I believe, it was a monetary compensation and a public acknowledgement. I think it was a standard across the board type of monetary sum for those people who were, and this is the problem with all of these things. It's like they had to be proven to be sterilized within a certain within a certain time frame. So there were reparations, and it was, a very historic and hard fought and hard won thing. And it was, it was great for the people that received those reparations, but there are definitely people who are left out of that process. So, as with many of these things, they're not flawless. And I do think the efforts in North Carolina were incredibly, for the most part, I would say that they were tried to be as inclusive and complete as possible. But it's just a very difficult thing to go back and make sure that everyone who has suffered these injustices is compensated or receives some kind of acknowledgement. And even then, it's like there's obviously no number, no price on your freedom on this freedom to be able to be a parent.
Okay.
Yeah, and also Virginia followed suit after North Carolina, and California, we hope, could be the third. I think it's also really important to say that we're coming up on the 100-year anniversary of the infamous 1927 Supreme Court case, Buck v. Bell, which upheld a statute instituting compulsory sterilization of the unfit for the protection and health of the state. And really, that set a precedent for states to legally sterilize people in prisons. And despite state, federal, and international law explicitly banning compulsory sterilizations, this Supreme Court decision has never been overturned.
Wow. Thank you for that, Erika. Angela, did you want to mention something?
Well, I can say one thing, which is something that Kelly herself has said, kind of one part of this reparations process is she wants to have some kind of a convening, like a get together of other survivors. Mm-hmm. That's really important to her, and I think is a real kind of part of her healing process, is to be with other survivors like this. So that's something that we really hope we can make happen.
Yes, I think that would be full of healing for all of the women who experience this. And it could help other women, whether they're in prison or not, just to think about how best they can advocate for themselves, and even how they can advocate for themselves within a system that does not respect them as human beings. And so I think that's going to be something important. And I think, by Kelly telling her story and other women who tell their stories, that can be empowering to other women who, within their life, who may come in contact with the criminal justice system. I mean, life happens, and, for them to be aware of these things, because we're making more women aware of what's going on the outside, but we need to also make sure that women are equipped with the tools and resources to advocate for themselves within systems that don't respect them. So I think that's very, very important. So I know, Erika, you've worked closely with Justice Now. Are there other organizations like Justice Now who are doing this work? Are they doing other programming around this? And, how can other folks get involved? How can civilians get involved with this?
Specifically in California, the California Coalition for Women in Prison, CCWP, is an incredible organization that is really doing this work with people inside California's women's prisons. There are so many other organizations across the nation that are also doing critically important work around prison reform, prison abolition, and really centering women and transgender people of color in the conversation about criminal justice issues. So I recommend that people research specific organizations in their communities.
Thank you. So for our final call to action, what can we do to ensure better healthcare in prisons? And what organizations can we support? I know you kind of mentioned this, to look for organizations within our areas, but what can we do to ensure better healthcare in prison?
Well, I mean, I think this is kind of Erika can maybe get kind of more specific, but I would say just in a larger way that I think it's really important, you know, as election time draws near, that we are really mindful of who we are voting into office for both local and federal, for all of the races, and making sure that that their interests are sort of aligned with your interests. So that's kind of a bigger picture thing that I would say, and I'm always on my soapbox about kind of the city council races and the smaller races. People always ignore those and forget those, and those are the races that really play a role in day-to-day life. So I would just kind of throw that out there. And you know, one thing that gave me hope is, as we all know, Kamala Harris was announced as the VP candidate with Biden, and you know, she has been pushing this Uterine Fibroids Research and Education Act. And that was really kind of hopeful for me because I'm someone who had fibroids and as you know, most Black women do, and to have someone who is sort of advocating for Black women's health like that publicly and putting like real money behind it shows why it's so important to have more diverse leadership, because they are more, you know, she is interested in that and has an understanding of how that affects such a large community and can push that forth. So that's kind of a broader thought process that I had. But Erika, if you had anything else you wanted to add.
I think that that's not much else to add. I think that just it's really important to say that we really need to take a critical look at dismantling how our institutions operate and work, and quality healthcare access to, the definition is adequate healthcare, is a basic legal human fundamental right that is not being it's being denied in every single institution across the country. So as we look at access to healthcare both inside correctional facilities and outside of correctional facilities, I think it's really important that we keep this basic human right to adequate healthcare at the forefront of how we view these policies.
I agree. And I just wanted to go back to what Angela was mentioning. At the Black Women's Health Imperative, we have we've developed a policy agenda for Black women to vote. We launched it back in 2018, but we're now revising it, and we will be releasing the 2020 version, in the September, early October, for Black women and women of color to use it as a resource to really hold elected officials accountable for the health and wellness of Black women. And I think, we have a huge focus on reproductive justice in there, and some other, chronic conditions and prevention that impact communities of color. So we are definitely making that available soon for Black women to use as a resource, as they're thinking about who they are putting in these offices at the local level, the state level. I mean, we have a scorecard at the end of the agenda that really helps you kind of shape how you want to ask these candidates, or how you assess, their policies and what they've supported in the past, to really arm yourself, because I think it's going to be very important for us, in terms of how we advocate for policies and practices that center us, that respect us, and ensure that we have our basic human rights. So thank you for mentioning that, Angela. And so I think for me, I think that's all the questions that I had for you ladies. I think we're gonna look into the Q&A box to see what some of the attendees are asking. So let me take a look and let's see. So a question came in and it says, what about the allegations of sexual harassment by prison doctors? In your research for the film, did you find out if any of them had, did you find out if any of them have been held accountable?
There are many lawsuits that you can search and find out about. To the degree that we would want people to be prison doctors to be held accountable, no one has been. There have been investigations by the medical board and still allowed to practice.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Another question came in. The laws that banned forced sterilizations, are they federal or state by state?
So international and federal and state law prohibits sterilization for a variety of different reasons. International law prohibits sterilization because it denies the basic coercive sterilization because it denies the basic fundamental human right to family. Federal law prohibits using federal funds to coercively sterilize someone or to sterilize someone in coercive environments. State laws essentially go even a step further to talk about how state funds cannot be used for coercive sterilizations.
Okay. Just checking to see if there are any other questions that are coming in. While we're waiting to see if any other folks have any questions, for each of you, Christen, Angela, and Erika, what gives you hope? You know, this film is out, folks have seen it. It will encourage folks to do what they can from where they are. I think Erika, to your point about reimagining what imprisonment looks like, I think you guys provided an amazing picture of what that looks like, and through the power of storytelling. So what gives you hope in the midst of all of this?
I can just say that I got a hit of hope when you were talking about like the Black Women's Health Initiative coming out with a voter guide, you know, and I think that that's something that not only Black women should be looking at following. It's, you know, I look forward to seeing that come out, and I will be, you know, checking that out because I think, you know, and so that's one thing I guess that I'm saying that gives me hope. It's like I'm seeing more and more people, more diversity of people speaking out and advocating for themselves and their points of view. And, you know, to kind of reiterate what Angela said in that way, that's what we need. I mean, this is this country, you know, we are a diverse country with diverse points of view and diverse needs. And so the more people who are engaged in the process of voting and especially right now in this upcoming election, you know, that's going to be what keeps me going, and that's a beautiful thing. That gives me hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think similarly, I feel kind of advocates doing this incredible work and more diverse advocates. It's really inspiring, and I think that the movement, the sort of defund movement, has given me hope, just in the sense of us being able to have these radical conversations could not have happened, and it took a very terrible thing, the pandemic, for it to, and the police killings, and just this moment that we're having that's very difficult. It took all of that, but then from it, There's a different level of activism and engagement and people imagining the world the way they want it to be and not feeling like they have to use the systems that exist as the foundation for what that is, being able to kind of go beyond what's out there and say, hey, maybe this system isn't working. We can come up with something completely different. And those kinds of conversations, I don't feel like we're happening in the same way. So that makes me hopeful and also allows me to do that similar thinking too. And hopefully from all of this, there will be a huge systemic change. That's kind of why we're doing the work and why we're made the film and are bringing it to as many people as we can.
I think I would echo everything that has already been said, and the tremendous work that you're doing at Black Women's Health Imperative is really is critical, and really centering back to, I think, what Kelly and Cynthia and some of the other people in the film talked about, is to be able to have conversations about dismantling our notion of imprisonment, dismantling the prison industrial complex. And those are conversations that are being had right now. That's incredibly inspiring and incredibly hopeful that we might be able to reimagine how we view crime and punishment in our society.
Yeah, and I would like to echo everything that you've all said, because it definitely gives young leaders hope in the work that they're doing, and I think now more than ever we're seeing how everything intersects. You cannot be alive right now and not see the intersectionality within your daily life and what it means, and where you fit into these systems and where you fit with creating new systems. So I think we all have the opportunity to create the change. We all have the opportunity to lend our voices, our talents to this work. And, just like how you guys have worked together to produce this film, to tell the story of women who may not have been told had it not been in this format. So just using all of our talents to really bring things to light, I think that gives me hope. It gives me hope in the work that I do with Black Women's Health Imperative, with working with young women around reproductive justice and sexual health, giving them the tools to be able to advocate for themselves and for policies and practices that that best fit them. So I think right now more than ever, horrible things are happening, but as we continue to have these conversations about them, I think we're able to normalize the change that we need, and for all of us to be change agents for that. So thank you all. And we have one final question that came in. Did Kelly ever get her happy ending?
Oh no, that pause was too long. It was just deciding he was talking. It's not.
I didn't know.
No. It's just the 3-person thing. But then the pause was so long, people were like, oh no.
I can be very dramatic sometimes.
Oh no. Well, I mean, the reparations bill is part of that. And so in that element, we're all pushing for that to happen. But, in terms of her personal life, she's, Erika, I forget her exact job. Can you tell me what her job is again? She has a great job and I forget what it is.
Yeah, Kelly sits on pretty much every board that deals with domestic violence. She's the Los Angeles Commissioner for Family and Community Services. She is the executive director and founder of the nonprofit Back to the Basics. And is probably she's managing a federal grant for domestic violence prevention and gang intervention. What is Kelly not doing?
Yeah, and she has a great, relationship with her sons, and they're a part of her life. And so, yes, but the reparations bill will really be that sort of final piece.
Yes, I'm happy to hear that for her. And I definitely can't wait to celebrate the reparations bill coming through and us being able to celebrate that. And I think that will be really grounds for celebration, especially for her and other women who have experienced this and survived. So I think that's it for our questions. So I want to thank our special guests, Christen, Angela, and Erika, as well as our audience for participating in this call to action conversation. For a recap of the organizations you can support around this topic, visit Day One on the rePRO website. Please make plans to support rePRO Film Festival by purchasing film tickets and attending more of their call to action conversations. You can get full info at repromamafilm.org. And don't forget, all ticket sales are donated to reproductive justice advocacy organizations. Thank you and have a great evening.